I've been exploring the overwhelming evidence that the world's ancient myths are part of some vast interconnected system. And that's myths from around the entire globe, including cultures that, according to the conventional paradigm, should not be connected. So we find patterns around the globe of, for instance, a baby being put into the water. In the Moses story, baby Moses has to be hidden, or Pharaoh and the Egyptians are going to kill him. So his mother puts him in a little basket and sets him adrift in the among the reeds of the Nile River, and then the daughter of the Pharaoh finds him. And that story pattern is found around the world. We find babies getting put into the water. A baby gets put into the water in the myths of ancient Japan. There's a ancient record in Japan called the Kojiki, where a baby is put into the water. And in the Mahabharata, there's a baby who's put into the water, and down I think it's the Ganges, might be the Indus. Now I'm forgetting. But in the Maori and across the Pacific, there's baby Maui gets thrown into the sea foam by his mother. So this is across cultures that should not be connected. There's others too that I'm just giving some examples here. The myths around the world have these patterns that repeat over and over, including, in the Americas and the Norse myths from northern, way northern Europe, Scandinavia. There should be no connection there, and yet there are. From the Maya myths and the Norse myths, and yet there are. And across the oceans to India, Africa, ancient China, ancient Japan, around the world. So this evidence is really abundant, and it's been talked about for centuries that myths have connections with the stars. And that includes the stories in the Bible, by the way, and I'll show a few. But they've been taken they've been taken literally. Obviously, the biblical stories have been taken literally, and that is a huge part of Western history. The Roman Empire got basically taken over by Christianity somehow. That how that happened is a very interesting story. And then shortly after that, the Roman Empire split in half into Western and Eastern. And what you have, Western Europe is basically the Western Roman Empire. It became very literalist Christian, and Christianity was used as a control mechanism for the feudal era of Europe. And basically that brought in the Dark Ages. That was the destruction of the ancient knowledge in the West. And in other places, the ancient knowledge didn't get destroyed as aggressively as it did in the West. So we still have, in China and India, you still have a kind of a stream that continues. And in Africa, that wasn't as disrupted as it was in the West. But anyway, that's what I've been exploring for the past 15 years, is showing the reason for this connection is there is some kind of an ancient worldwide system based on the stars where the actual characters can be shown to connect directly to constellations. I mean, Moses is a constellation. Jesus is a constellation. The Buddha is a constellation. I can show that. I have shown that. It's part of this esoteric system. And so I've written 11 books on it. I have courses on, on-demand courses, just a few. I've done 4 of those. But if people are interested in learning that system, I've been publishing as much as I can to show how it works. And that's it's just a passion that I wasn't even looking for. I was taking the Bible literally. Although I loved the myths, I didn't think the Bible was myths. And so it was a real world-changing discovery when I started to realize not only are all the ancient myths connected, and they're connected to the stars, but this same system is operating in the Bible. So I had to change my whole worldview, my whole outlook
What
on everything.
what was it that made you link these ancient myths to the stars?
Right. So, Aaron, good question. I always grew up loving myths, even when I was very little. I had lots of books on myths. I had a lot of exposure to myths, mainly Greek myths and Norse myths. On my
Mm,
dad's side of the family is Norwegian, so I was drawn to the Norse myths, but the Greek myths, of course, are kind of infused through a lot
yeah.
of literature. So I loved the Odyssey and I loved the Greek myths. And I also loved the stars. My dad used to take me out to look at the stars. And so I always loved those two things, but I didn't put them together until I read a book called Hamlet's Mill. So Hamlet's Mill was written in 1969 by these two professors. They were already older when they wrote it, and it was mentioned in a book by Graham Hancock. And a lot of alternative researchers about ancient history have mentioned Hamlet's Mill because the authors of Hamlet's Mill say, oh, look at this story about using a jawbone as a weapon. Samson in the Bible uses a jawbone as a weapon. Well, isn't it interesting that in South America, there's a myth about someone using a jawbone as a weapon from a different animal? And Maui actually uses a jawbone of his grandmother to, as a weapon. What's going on here? And it's around the world. And they also show in that book, so it's a very haphazard book and it's not a well organized book. And a lot of people find it a frustrating book. It is frustrating. I think the authors should be commended for seeing this pattern and having the courage to talk about it because academically, that was not a uh, popular thing to say. Well,
Yeah.
all cultures are connected. What are you talking about? The history department is like get right out of town and don't come back. The the other thing they mentioned that really caught my attention. So they stumble around saying there's some kind of connection and it appears to have to do with planets and stars, but they don't really draw out how it works, why. But I give them all this credit for seeing it. And then I got obsessed to try and piece it together more because I already knew a lot about the stars and a
Mm.
lot about the myths. And it turns out I knew a lot about the Bible. Every time they mention, oh, and these Bible stories too seem to be based on the stars, I was like, no, 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 no. The Bible's based on, Samson was a historical person. Don't call him a myth. But the more I pulled on that string, the more I realized that it's completely myth. I'll tell you what it was that changed my mind, Aaron. But the other thing they mentioned that's super interesting is the recurrence of numbers that have to do with precession. So the precession of the equinoxes is this very, very slow, ages long change in the heavens, where the heavens are delayed by about 1 degree every 72 years. And it's very subtle, it's hard to see it because by delayed 1 degree, I mean the background stars that the sun is in on a particular day from a particular place will be 1 degree back 70 after 72 years. That's
Mhm.
like the width of your finger after 72. So you have to take very careful readings for 72 years, like start when you're 5 and by the time you're 79, or 77, you'll see 1 degree of change. It's a precise measurement, but that number 72 and its multiples then show up around the world. There's 108 is 72 times 1.5, and 432 and 216. These are numbers that are incorporated in like the ratio of the pyramids to the earth is 432. They mention a ritual, the Agni Kayana ritual in ancient India, which uses bricks, and they use 100. They build an altar for the fire. It's a fire ritual. They build an altar with 108,000 bricks. Or the Vedas are supposed to have, I think, 432 million syllables or something like that. It's all these numbers keep repeating in myth.
Mm.
And in the Norse myths, they mention the Agni fire altar that's built with 108,000 bricks. And then they mention in the Norse myths, there's a passage about Ragnarok when the twilight of the gods is going to come and the great cataclysmic battle at the end of time or the end of this age, this world. It's actually they're talking about processional ages, but the the Valhalla, the heroes that come out of Valhalla, it says, well, it will be that 400 doors. uh, there's a passage that says how many doors there are in Valhalla, four score. I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but and 8 warriors can walk abreast through each door. And if you multiply it out, it comes to 432,000 warriors. And they mentioned that in Hamlet's Mill, and I said, "Whoa, how could there be, these number patterns around the world, Norse myths, myths from ancient India in the Vedas? What connection is there?" And because I was very keyed into the stars already, I understood the constellations pretty well. I could actually start seeing constellations that Hamlet's Mill didn't get. And so I kind of became like um, the the Hollywood stereotype of the guy who has the shed and with all the strings and the map, he's
Yeah, yeah.
getting really obsessive about it and trying to take it further than what they did. And, I believe I've probably taken it further than, anyone I've seen in history. But there was an English preacher in the early 1800s who talked about how the Bible stories were based on constellations,
Mm.
and he did a tremendous job. His name was Robert Taylor. He was born in the late 1700s, died in about 1832, but he was a preacher. He lost his job, he lost his income because he was saying, well, I've discovered that the Bible is based on the stars. And they locked him up in jail. They said, well, this is heresy, you can't teach this publicly. And they threw him in jail for a total of 3 years. So this has been talked about by people in the past. I would say Robert Taylor got it. He got it closer than Hamlet's Mill in terms of the connections to the stars. But I disagree with him on what he thinks it was all about. He thinks it's all about just fooling people. I think it's part of an ancient system that's actually for positive purposes. But just like martial arts can be used, martial arts are an ancient system, kung fu, that can be used to defend the helpless, or it could be used to bully people. Well,
Yeah.
same thing.
Mhm.
This ancient system could be turned to, um, deceive and trick people, or it could be used to uplift people. So